Mr. Slawinski, the meeting is now started.
Thank you very much, Carlin. And welcome to everybody. Happy Monday to you all. Hope you all had a great Thanksgiving weekend and were able to relax a bit and also stayed safe during that time. I'm Jason Slawinski, City Manager, here today again with Bill Kilpatrick, our Police Chief, and a few members of his command staff as well. I'll let him introduce those as we get go on here. A couple of things that I wanted to note at the outset about tonight and what our goal is. You all know that, well, hopefully you do, that on October 29th, we had our first listening session. And I know some of you were on that session. And you shared with us a lot of information and comments and some questions about law enforcement and how we do things in relation to the many law enforcement activities that we're responsible for. Raised a lot of important topics as they relate to racial equity and justice. And we were busy that evening taking notes. And tonight, what we want to do is follow up to that. We weren't initially planning this session. I had mentioned our next session would be in January, but I thought it would be helpful for us to circle back with everyone before too many weeks passed and allow for an opportunity for the Golden Police Department to share information with everyone on in follow up to those questions that you all asked. And there were some great questions and great ideas and great thoughts, and we want to tonight circle back on those and provide some information to you about all of those things. The other thing I'd like to do before we close, after the police department's had an opportunity to share information with you, is then open the floor up again like we did last time for any follow-up thoughts, comments, things you might have thought about since the last time we got together, or any reactions you have to things you might have heard from our police department tonight. So those are the primary two things I'd like to accomplish. I don't know how long that'll take, but we'll stay on as long as necessary. Just a reminder, housekeeping, if everyone could keep on mute, and then when the time comes, if you would like to say something, signal me and I'll call on you just so we can have an orderly way of speaking and hear everybody. That would be great and much appreciated. I do recognize, lastly, I'll say I do recognize that some of the topics that we'll be talking about tonight are can be relatively lengthy and in-depth topics. So, for example, something like our training around use of force and de-escalation and things like that, we probably could hold a 3 or 4 hour class on, I'm sure, to give you all the ins and outs of that. But what we plan on doing is hopefully sharing enough information where you have a better understanding of what we do and hitting those high points. And then if additional information is desired after that on anything that we talk about tonight, we can put you in touch with the police department if an individual has an issue they want to talk further about, or if there's something that the group feels that would be helpful to dig more into detail with. One of the things that the chief and I talked about a week or two ago was perhaps setting up some smaller sessions that the police department puts on to further dig into any one specific topic area, if that would be helpful. So that's the order of business for tonight. And again, I appreciate you joining us on a Monday evening, last day of November. And just a friendly reminder, we'll still plan on holding our early January session to continue the community conversation. And then I think we have penciled in for January the 7th. So keep that on your radar screen as well. So with that, I will introduce our police chief, Bill Kilpatrick, and ask him if he would like to make any introductory comments and introduce his team. And then Chief, if you'd like to just jump in and go through some of the information you planned on sharing tonight, that'd be great.
Well, thank you, Jason. Appreciate that. I want to thank everybody that's online tonight for being here. As Jason had indicated to you back in, this I think will be the third time that I will have had a discussion, or at least been part of a discussion or a listening session. The first conversation was with City Council back in July. Then, as the boss said, we had a conversation, a listening session, really not a conversation, back on October 29th. And that the purpose of that meeting really was to get feedback from those of you out in the community who felt like you had things you wanted us to hear, to listen to consider, or just to take into account. So at that meeting, there were lots of issues that were brought up, significant numbers of issues. As Jason said, we all tried to take the best notes possible during the course of that. And as a result of that, we then tried to group those various topics into general themes. And I came up with about 10 themes that we thought we would try to go over tonight. And those are the themes that we thought were perhaps the ones that we should address first and foremost. And those themes, by the way, and I'll tell you what those are in a moment, but those themes came not just from that listening session, but I also tried to incorporate some that might have been questions that came through other formats like Facebook or email to myself or to the city in general. And so we took those 10, we pared them down to 10. I want to tell you that we're not going to be covering everything that came up on October 29th or all those questions that were perhaps posted on Facebook. These are the ones that we thought we should try to address and that we could address in a reasonable amount of time. Some of them we will discuss in more depth and detail. Some will be in shorter format. And then we will have an opportunity for all of you to ask questions. And we do believe it's our intent to have future sessions, as Jason said, which might even include things like, let's say, on some of the techniques we use in arrest control, that we could have a virtual meeting that would involve our a couple of our use of force instructors who would show you what we do, how we do it, how we train it, and why we do it. And a lot of that would be based on, I think, things that you would like to hear from us as we move forward. Tonight, I'm not going to be dominating the answers to the themes. I will discuss a few, but so will our Deputy Chief Joe Harvey, who's with us tonight, and he just waved, and one of our commanders, Mike Hendershot, who's in charge of patrol, who will talk. Our commander that's in charge of support services, which includes investigations, is not with us tonight because he's frankly, he's been quarantined because of COVID exposure. So with that, our themes that we're going to discuss tonight cover community engagement, body-worn cameras, use of force and de-escalation, crisis intervention training, explicit and implicit bias, the use of the co-responder program. We'll discuss briefly the suggestion that several people had as it relates to Denver's STAR initiative. 8 Can't Wait, that's come up on a number of occasions. And school resource officers. And lastly, from our perspective, the sharing of data. So As I said, those are the things we're going to discuss tonight. If there's things you want us to expand on, you'll have opportunity to ask questions. And if there's additional information at the end that you would like, please feel free to share that. So we're going to start with theme one. The question for theme one is, how can we increase community engagement between the police department and the community? And I'll have our deputy chief, Joe Harvey, address that question. And Joe, also, if you want to just say a few words about your experience, so folks will be aware of that, that would be good too.
Sure. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to report back to you. I was present during the first listening session and was taking notes, and I think that for all of us to get to where we want to go, it's going to take this partnership of us growing together. In terms of who I am, I'm the deputy chief. I've been here in Golden for 6 years. I have about 33 years of law enforcement experience with 3 different law enforcement agencies. I have a vast array of certifications and college education, et cetera. In terms of where I stand in law enforcement, I'm a firm believer in pretty much a 3-pronged approach to law enforcement. The first one is I know people want to feel safe in their homes, they want to feel safe when they're driving to work, and they want a police department that engages them. So those are the 3 prongs that I believe in. Those are the same prongs that the chief believes in, which is what allowed him and I to combine together to work in partnership with where we're taking the department. So what I would like to do is talk a little bit about community engagement. And I have to be honest with you, when this topic first came up, I was thinking to myself, well, we got this one knocked out of the ballpark. We do an exceptional job on community engagement. But Tyler brought up some interesting things, and I was writing feverish notes as I was going through, and then started texting the chief during the listening session when he started talking about having a liaison. And so during that time, I came up with an idea of creating a community engagement group. So I'm going to get to that in a second, because I do want you to know we heard that. And I think the theme you're going to hear from the police department tonight is we can always do better. We know we can do better. We hear you, and we want to be better. So in order to do that, it takes sometimes learning what you don't know. You don't know what you don't know until you know what it is that you don't know. And so hearing from the community about those things helps us become a better organization. So what does the department currently do in terms of community engagement? Well, I think we have a pretty robust program. We have a number of community involved programs. We start with our Citizens Academy, which is a year-long program. Would encourage everybody to go online and sign up. We'll probably be doing it virtual in 2021, but it is a fantastic program, and it teaches you about all aspects of law enforcement, gets you ingrained in the department. You get to meet a number of the members of our organization. But I think the biggest process is you'll learn a lot about what police do. The second program is we have a youth program, a youth academy, and it's the same thing, but only it's for kids, and it's 1 week during the summertime, another fantastic program. And then when I first got to the city of Golden, the chief and I conspired to create a new program that's not being implemented, as far as I know, anywhere else around the United States, and it's called the Safety Academy. And what we thought about was we take all of these reports for victimization of crimes, but yet we really don't do a very good job of teaching our community how to not become a victim of a crime, how to make sure how to get out of a house if it's burning, how to make sure you protect your packages during the holiday season, those types of things. So we created a year-long Safety Academy, and I would also encourage you guys to attend that as well. It's, again, a year-long program. You meet once a month, and the topics will really help you become informed about your surroundings and how you can reduce the chances of becoming a victim of a crime. So those are 3 unique programs. But we also do a lot of other things. So we encourage our officers on a daily basis to try to engage members of the community. Many times they'll attend a homeowners meeting if we've been invited. We have block party notifications and special event notifications. We encourage our officers to get out and do foot patrols during those and talk to folks. When we have large-scale community events, we make sure that the vast majority of our officers are on foot. So like 4th of July, Buffalo Bill Days, things like that, so that our officers are actually engaging members of the community and talking and asking questions, answering questions. And so I really felt like we were doing a good job. But then Tyler started talking about how do we liaison with folks in the community that may have a distrust of law enforcement, not necessarily the Golden Police Department, but law enforcement in general. How do we start breaking down barriers that create contrast between what we're trying to provide as a law enforcement organization and who we stand for, what do we stand for, but get the members of our community to see us as a partner with them. And so we decided that we are going to implement, thank you, Tyler, a community engagement group. And our community services unit is working on putting some basic parameters around this concept. And then we're going to reach out to the community and get a group of our community members to partner with the police department. And we've already come up with a couple of topics that we want this group to start working on. The first one is when Chief Kilpatrick became chief, he created a mission, vision, and value statement that has been in place for 18 years. And he and I were talking about, is it time for us to rebrand our organization a bit? And so we want to engage this group to help us potentially rebrand the mission, vision, and values of the Golden Police Department for not just today, but where are we going to be at in 5 and 10 years down the road? And how do we incorporate some of the concepts that we've seen going on around the world to improve our organization, but also to create a beacon of light that reaches not only the police department, but out to our community? So there's the first thing we're going to start on. The second thing I want that group to work on is another component that Tyler was talking about, which is, can we create a liaison officer program to meet the needs of specific groups within our community that may not want to just pick up the phone and call the police? So what would that look like? How would we get that to work? So we're going to use that group to start that process. And then we've also are open to the idea of having a member of this group serve on our policy review committee and actually provide a community thought, impact, components to how we're implementing and approving our new policies. Another one that we're still in discussion with and consideration is we have this thing called the Incident Review Board that reviews every use of force, forced entry, anything that results in a firm action by the police department gets reviewed by a group of subject matter experts. We're considering, how do we get somebody trained that they could participate into that committee? Is that a plausible idea? Is it not a plausible idea? But there's another component that we may work on that with. So I think that group has some interesting potential for us to create two different components out of it. One is, I think that we will have this group that will be long-term, that will work with the police department and provide a lot of feedback to us. And then I think we'll see some spinoffs of maybe obtaining this liaison role and how we might be able to implement that. So I think those are some of the answers I would give you for now regarding community engagement, where we have been in the past, and then where we think we can move forward. Again, I want to say that this is the beginning. You know, you don't just go like a piranha doesn't take the full fish one bite at a time. We got to take small bites in order for us to do this right. And then I think that the community group can really help us identify other strategies that we may be able to implement and utilize this group in helping the department advance and grow.
Thank you, Joe. And one additional general comment I wanted to make is that some of what you'll hear tonight is in response to those themes. And what we will be telling you in some of these is, this is what we currently do or how we address it. Others you might hear, like with what Deputy Chief Harvey just said, some ideas that we have about where we want to go forward. I want to make it pretty clear that what we're trying to do, especially right now, as we're at the beginning stages of all of this, is tell you the kinds of things we do, but it shouldn't be interpreted by you that means that's the way we're always going to do it. There may be some circumstances where we say, well, we have good reasons for this, and you got to give it, we need reasons why we shouldn't. but we are very open to the idea that there are perhaps better ways to do things that might be more acceptable to our community, but we want to have conversations about those. So again, the idea is that some of what we're going to talk about tonight is this is what we're doing, this is what we've been doing, but it doesn't mean it has to stay written like that for the duration. So the second theme is revolves around the implementation of body-worn cameras. And again, Deputy Chief Harvey will talk about that.
Thank you, Chief. One more last piece on the community engagement. I want to let the folks listening know that the police department came up with 3 unified goals for the entire police department. One of those goals is directed around a 3-prong approach towards establishing long-term partnerships within the community we serve. And that 3-prong approach involves community outreach, community programs, and community engagement. So I think the community group will work with us on that as well. So that was another piece I wanted to throw in there. Now, in terms of body-worn cameras, this is not something new. The chief has wanted to implement body-worn cameras as long as I've been here, so at least for 6 years. And the police department really engaged in some very detailed research on body-worn cameras back in 2016. We put together a coalition that did a lot of work on body-worn cameras. They reviewed policies from numerous agencies. We put several of body-worn cameras into implementation in the field to do research on them to see how well they would work for our agency. We interviewed 14 other agencies that had implemented body-worn cameras. We looked at the pros, the cons of each of those. What are the pros and cons to implementation? Pros and cons to the equipment? What were some of the issues they found after implementation, training, those kinds of things? And so a lot of work was done on it. And then as a result, we partnered with the Wheat Ridge Police Department and actually applied for a grant, and we were given the grant. And at the end of the day, we had to make a business decision because the cost of a body-worn camera system, which I'll get to in just a minute, is extremely expensive and it's in perpetuity. And at the time, there really wasn't a hue and cry for an agency like Golden to implement body-worn cameras from our community. And so we had to do a business decision and look at it and say, is it something we can look at down the road, or is it something we need to implement now? And so the decision was made not to implement at that time. Now we fast forward to 2020, we've had a number of significant terrible events happen within the law enforcement community and then the community at large, including George Floyd and others. And the politicians in Colorado implemented a bill, Senate Bill 217. And as a result of that bill, they have required law enforcement agencies in the state of Colorado to implement a body-worn camera system no later than July of 2023. And so we engaged in some meaningful conversations within the department and said, do we want to wait until 2023? And the answer was no. We think we should implement as quickly as possible. And so we, again, started embarking in the process of saying, how quickly can we get that done? Well, I can tell you we've moved on it very quickly. And with any luck, we will be going into contract by the end of the year, and we will be implemented in the first half of next year. So we have done the research. We have worked very hard with a third-party vendor. Because of the work we were able to do with that third-party vendor and the ability of, if council will approve this later in December, if they will approve it, we will be able to go under contract and get these things implemented in early next year. The cost is expensive. So over a 10-year cost, it was going to be over $1 million. By us being able to go under contract and doing some hard negotiation with the vendor, we were able to get a discount of up to $117,000 over the 10 years. That's a lot of money that we can save the city if we go under contract with this vendor, which is what we believe is the best vendor for us to do an implementation with. And I think that shows value to our community, that we want to implement this the right way. We want to get it done as quickly as possible. But we also have to be financial stewards of your money, because it's your taxpayer dollars which fund the city, and this is a big ask. So at the end of the day, we think it's very important for us to get these implemented. It's important to know that back in 2016, we had already written a very strong policy That policy had gone through legal review, was also sent off to the ACLU, who gave us the official thumbs up after they made a few changes. And so we believe the policy is strong. The policy is going to get updated with some of the components that stem from Senate Bill 217. And then we will have that ready to go. So we think that we can be expeditious in implementing the system. The officers in our department are very excited about having body-worn cameras. They're ready for the implementation. There will be no hesitation on the parts of our employees. They think it is going to be a benefit, not only to them, but to the community at large in helping to tell the story, every story of every contact when we come into contact with individuals and what was the results of that contact. And so I think that this is a fast track, but I think it's the right thing to do. I think our community members, those of you that are listening, want this system implemented. And I think that you should know that we've worked hard on it and we're ready to go. And I think that at the end of the day, you'll be very pleased with the product we've picked, the way that we were able to execute, I think, a financially appropriate contract, and then the fact that our agency is going to be in full support of this and we'll be utilizing them accordingly.
Joe, can I interrupt you for a second? If you don't mind, I'm going to just ask if there are any clarification questions from those that are listening in regarding the first two themes you talked about, community engagement or implementation of body-worn cameras. And then if there are, raise them now so we can, before you might forget them, we can offer whatever clarification. And if not, we'll move on to your next topic, which is use of force. But if there are any questions from those who are listening in, signal me if you have a clarifying question for the Deputy Chief. And again, I'll circle back at the very end when we've gotten through all the questions just for general comments. But what I plan on doing is just pausing after every couple of questions just to make sure there's no clarifying questions from those listening in. But that might be helpful so you don't forget those. Okay, I'll kick it back to you, Joe, and if you want to go on to your next question.
So the next theme stemmed around use of force, training. So I want to talk about policy a little bit and training, and then also de-escalation. So the first thing I should tell you is that we had a good use of force policy, but it wasn't great. And so for the last year, before the George Floyd event happened, we had already been in the process of rebranding our entire use of force policy. It takes a long time to build a policy that we believe will take us into the future, a very strong policy that guides the actions of our employees properly in as many scenarios and situations as we can possibly dictate. That use of force policy has gone through significant outside scrutiny and review. I can tell you it is currently sitting with the ACLU and we're waiting for their final feedback. Before that, it was reviewed by a professor of law at the University of Colorado. For those CU graduates, go Buffs. I'm a CU grad, so I have to throw that in every time. But it actually went through a use of force expert at a professor at the University of Colorado who provided us a lot of feedback. We took those components in and added those. Myself and the subject matter expert, who was the primary writer, who was Sergeant Adam Zutman, we worked hand in hand with our city attorney, and we had multiple meetings, and we were scrutinizing every word in the policy. What is the meaning? How will our officers think about that word? How do they respond to that word? Does it give them clear direction? We want to simplify it so that they're not thinking about the policy as much as what is the right thing to be doing, because the policy guides those actions. After that review, we sent it to CIRSA, who is the insurance carrier for most cities in Colorado. And they had hired an outside firm that specializes in these topics. And the attorney that reviews that, I happen to know very well. His name is Eric Zaporin, and he is an expert in use of force matters. And he reviewed our policy. He actually sent it back and said it was one of the best policies he has actually reviewed to date. So it has gone through a lot of scrutiny, but we're not ready to unveil it yet because we're waiting for the ACLU to give us that final stamp, because then we believe that we've had a number of outside sources who have had their input on it and have said, yes, this is a policy we believe in, and we can now roll out to our officers and say, now we can train you properly. We think it will be implemented soon. The chief has reached back out to the ACLU to find out where it's at. I can tell you it went to their national office. So it's getting a real review by real experts who understand these things and are going to give us real feedback. We will make those changes and we're going to get that policy out. Once it's out, we will get it posted on our website for everybody to see. But I think for those listening, the big takeaway is that this was not done in a vacuum. It was done outside with open eyes and with a focus on providing our officers with the best tool possible to do their job in the most meaningful way. What I will tell you about use of force is that unfortunately in law enforcement, there are times where an officer must use force to end a scenario. Those situations are never good. They're never good for the officer. They're never good for the citizen in encountering that. I often say that taking people into custody sometimes is ugly. Not everybody just turns around, puts their hands behind their back, and goes peacefully. Some people, for whatever reason, whether it's a mental breakdown or whether some drugs are on board and are altering their decision-making mechanisms, or as I've seen in my own personal career, sometimes anger can be so high that a person is responding from the anger and not out of common sense or what a normal, reasonable person might do. And so in these situations, force is required. It is a ugly necessity of the job that we have to do to help keep our community safe. We want that done right every time, every single time. And so we scrutinize every use of force incident in this department. And that includes when an officer puts their hands on an individual and just has to move them or muscle them. We consider that a use of force, and it is scrutinized by a group of subject matter experts. And what we're looking at is, did the officer perform properly? Was our policy sound? If the policy needs to be changed, then we make policy implementation changes. If the officer was wrong, we hold the officer accountable. And every one of those reviews goes to the chief of police, and he has to sign off on every single one of those. So I think there's a good process involved with use of force. And I think it's important for you to understand that that's some of the process. It's a bit of the backside of the story. Now let's move forward as to what we're doing with training. Of course, the post standards, which are the standards of training that Colorado is required to provide every peace officer, states that we have to give 24 hours of hard skills training. Hard skills training does include arrest control. It includes driving. It includes firearms. And then we have to do a whole bunch of other training. That's not a lot of time if you think about it, right? You have an officer who's working 40 hours a week and they're only going to rely on 24 hours. Well, how many years does it take before that officer builds up enough exposure and enough experience to be able to manage every single situation as best as they possibly can? It takes time to accommodate that. And so we went back and we were looking at this, and I will tell you again, this happened earlier in 2020, way before even before COVID happened. We had already started to look at how can we improve our officers' ability to de-escalate scenarios. And one of the things we did was we said we are going to send 2 of our officers out of state to California to attend ICAT training. Now, ICAT training is a program that was designed by PERF, which is the Police Executive Research Forum. It's the think tank, if you will, for all of law enforcement in the United States. And this is their program. They went back and they reviewed use of force, policies, everything to do with use of force. And they put this program together to say, we think this tool will be the best one moving forward. In the past, we used a tool called verbal judo. And that program was good because it did teach officers how to maintain their composure when dealing with a member of the community who might be upset or angry, or somebody who might be dealing with a very significant emotional event in their life. How do we calm this person down? How do we help this person communicate and understand that we're here to help them. What this program is designed to give officers tools in scenarios like the ones we've been seeing around the United States that have ended badly. So this is about integrating communication, assessment, and tactics. And so what we do is we go back and we're teaching officers through scenario-based training and in-classroom training how to think differently before they even enter the room. And then when they enter the room, they have tools that they can be using to click through their mind to say, okay, how do I start de-escalating this so it doesn't have to go to a use of force scenario? And so this ICAT training, we just started doing that. We'll have, on the 9th, we have our last group of training for this year, which was 4 hours per officer. And then in February of 2021, every officer is going to go through an additional 18 hours of training over 2 straight days. And there's a lot of scenario-based training in this where we put officers in a position where they actually have to de-escalate a variety of different situations. So that's something we're doing that's new. We've implemented and we've already started to move forward. And I think it's going to really help our officers out in terms of de-escalation. But I want to tell you about something else that's new that we think is pretty exciting, is that Georgetown Law created a program called ABLE, and ABLE stands for Active Bystandership for Law Enforcement, so Project ABLE. And this is a very up-to-date, brand new program that has been brought out that talks about abuse in law enforcement and how do we prevent misconduct? How do we avoid police mistakes? How do we teach officers how to properly intervene when they see something is wrong? Not just a use of force scenario, but when they see an officer's conduct is wrong, the way they're treating another citizen. Maybe they catch a person on a bad day and they can go up to that officer and say, hey, I've got this. That's what this program is going to be about. And so when I looked at this, I decided that I thought it was important enough because of the topic that I'm actually sending Commander Drew Williams to the instructor school on this. We had to get 4 letters of reference. One was written by the city manager, one by the chief. We had a local pastor write one. And then we had the Golden Anti-Racism Collective write a recommendation letter for us, and we were selected to send somebody. So later this month, Commander Drew Williams will attend the training. And then in February, every single officer will be required to go through the 8-hour course on how to avoid police misconduct. So we're excited about that. That one is new, and it is a lot based on the things that have happened recently, us doing some research and trying to find ways that we can improve our organization. So how do I sell to you today? How do I influence you to believe that we're trying to do the right thing? I want to go over for just a moment what our in-service calendar is going to look like. So every year we do an in-service training for every police officer, and they're required to go through 40 hours. This year, the entire 40 hours is solely about de-escalation. It is solely about giving our officers tools to do a better job, to make our community feel safer, to reduce every potential conflict without having to go hands-on with anybody. So it's going to include, again, 18 hours of that ICAT training, another 9 hours of Project ABLE training, the arrest control training that we do have to use. This year is only about proper holds and restraints. There'll be no takedowns, no teaching people how to hit or throw punches. It is all about the lowest levels of hands-on restraining and helping to get a person calmed down. We're going to be doing our bias policing training again. And then we have to go through some of the other stuff, which is some basic policies. And, we have to teach every year, we have to go through teaching an officer how to be able to detect somebody who's driving under the influence and how to use some of the less lethal tools like a taser or a baton or OC. These things are mandatory and we have to get that training in. So I think as you can see that the majority of our training this year is going to be on de-escalation. What I want to do is just share quickly with you that within our organization, we value training. We get a robust training budget every year. We send people to lots of training. We ask them to come back. I can tell you right now, I heard the chief online today. I know one of our use of force instructors is online. They're going through a 3-day use of force summit being taught by the Dago Law Group. Dago Law Group is a group that we pay for a subscription, and we train our officers that are required to go through training every 2 weeks. It's all video based, but it's an attorney talking about case law and how to properly apply the law in the performance of their duties. But this particular summit is all about use of force. So we have somebody going through that 3-day training right now. They're taking copious notes. They're going to bring that back, all that updated themes that we can then look at, evaluate, and then implement. Some of the other training our department does is surviving verbal conflict. We just sent one of our employees off to become an instructor in that. Last year, everybody went through 2 hours of training, and we're going to continue to do that. Again, the vast majority of these scenarios start with 2 people communicating, and one of those is the officer. So we want to teach them how to try to de-escalate every one of those situations. We hadn't been doing a very good job of that. We had done what was required under the law, what we needed to do to keep our officers post-certified. The 2 things that we just talked about was our way of looking at this ahead of the game to start saying we recognize we need to do better at it. One was before this and now one after, and I think that's going to help us get to where we're going in terms of de-escalation and use of force. And I'll take any questions if you have any questions on that, because you guys have heard me talk for a while, and I think the next one's going to be Commander Hendershot.
Any questions for our Deputy Chief on use of force and de-escalation? I've not seen any. So the next topic, I believe, is crisis intervention training, and that is Mike Hendershot. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct, Jason. Good evening, everybody. This is going to segue quite a bit about what the Deputy Chief just covered as far as de-escalation techniques are concerned. I also listened to the previous listening session that we have been discussing, and I was a little excited. Well, number one, I know that there's a lot of work to be done, which we've stressed here, that clearly we have just begun this process. But one of the things that, as we were going through that earlier process, I was a little excited about. One of the things was that we are doing a few things correctly, and we have been for quite some time. And one of those things is crisis intervention team training. The city of Golden has been, we were one of the founding agencies, and I'm not going to go into a lengthy history of it, but we were one of the founding agencies that started crisis intervention training back in 2002. That's how long this has been around. So it's been around for a long time. And essentially, if you don't really have a comprehensive understanding of what that means, crisis intervention training is a week-long course. It is very intensive that police officers go through, and it teaches officers to learn how to not only recognize the different types of mental illness that we encounter on the street. And we all know that mental illness is a huge problem in our society today. It teaches officers how to recognize when they're encountering different types of mental illness, and not only to recognize it, but how to communicate with those people more importantly. I've been through the course myself. I was so impressed with it that I subsequently went through a coaching course after that. So it is incredible stuff. It is very, very difficult to get through the course. They actually hire actors that specialize in how to act like people that have mental illness. If you're interested in this, there are YouTube videos that shows this training, officers going through these scenarios. And officers typically don't like to go through role-playing scenarios, but these are very realistic. The actors are specialists in portraying the type of mental illness that they portray, and it is very difficult to communicate. And by the end of the week, you are absolutely able to communicate with these people, learn how to talk to them. And as the Deputy Chief just pointed out, it's all about de-escalation with the ultimate goal of less use of force on people with mental illness. Unfortunately, it still happens, don't get me wrong. But our goal is less use of force, especially less deadly use of force with people experiencing mental crisis. So I think we've done a really good job with that at Golden. And I'll just go so far as to say that we are the only agency, as far as I know, in Jefferson County that we strive for 100% of our sworn officers to be certified CIT officers. We are currently at 95%, and the only reason for that is we are down. We just hired 2 officers. We have not been able to get them to the training, but as the chief will tell you, and I've been around for a while myself, we are one of the only agencies that we are serious about CIT, and we have been for a long time. And I think that's something to be very proud of. We've seen a lot of success in this. We see it in the incident review boards, where we've identified issues that could have potentially been deadly force situations that the officers were able to de-escalate. So it's one of the positives I think that we have going for us. One of our officers, Joe Page, is one of the regional directors. We host the classes routinely for this for other agencies. And the fact that we have, 95% with a goal of 100% participation at our agency speaks highly for this program. And that's it for that.
Mike, I'll have you also, since they kind of merged together pretty well, talk about the co-responder program.
Yeah, that's another good one, Chief. And that was also brought up at the listening session. The co-responder program is relatively new to us, and I'll explain real briefly what it is. A lot of people have a slight misconception about what it is. We have we went into a collaborative effort with Jefferson Center for Mental Health. This goes back about a year to about November of last year. We went into a partnership with Jefferson County Sheriff's Department, the Wheat Ridge Police Department, and us, as well as JCMH, in trying to get a co-responder program here in our area. We were successful in getting a grant through DOLA. The Department of Local Affairs gave us a grant last year for 2 co-responders. We've had one on board for approximately a year. She has been fantastic, and I think that if you don't quite know what a co-responder program is, it is all about mental health. We discuss different things that other social networks can be doing instead of law enforcement. This is a prime example of that. And having a civilian co-responder program. Now, these are certified clinicians. They have to have master's degrees either in counseling or social work. They can't just be anybody off the street. They are highly trained individuals, and they work directly with our patrol officers. To date, I can't go through all the statistics. We don't have the time. If somebody wants to reach out and give the chief your email, I'll be glad to share the statistics with you. But to date, we have had over 250 referrals to our co-responder. Phenomenal work she's been doing for us. Now, we just brought another one online recently. Essentially what they do for us is they allow us to have a resource, our patrol officers to have a resource to refer people who are either experiencing a mental crisis or they have experienced previous mental health holds. They have mental health issues. They've had social issues because of mental health. It is all encompassing all of those things. And she has been phenomenally, she's just been great. We've had a lot of success with the program. And I think the chief could talk a little bit about why this is important. We're looking for funding going forward into 2021 to keep this program going. We're still looking for grants to keep the program going, because we really want to keep this program going. So, Chief, we'll have a little bit more if I can share some more statistics. Like I said, we've had over 250 referrals to her. She will go and perform follow-ups. And I think what's notable out of that, and I have a lot of different successes here, but out of those 250, several of them were referred to different agencies, but 24 of those had a successful outcome for a referral. And what that means is that they have successfully gone through a program and either received treatment to where they're no longer in the system, they're not being placed on a mental health hold and those types of things. So it's been a great program, and I'd be glad to answer any other questions about that. As far as how it actually works and the dynamic is our co-responder is in our town about 20 to 30 hours a week. They do respond out with our police officers into the field, but they also do follow-ups that the officers send them, and they go out and do, they do phone work or field work, and it's been highly successful.
So what I would simply add to that is that we will be presenting sometime in 2021, depending upon how grant funding goes, to look to see how we can continue to fund this. And we'll be doing some research into the idea as to whether or not we should have somebody attached full-time to the police department who that's their responsibility. I can tell you that of the cops that I've talked to that work here who have had the opportunity to utilize the co-responder, they have nothing but positive things to say about how impactful it is and how it assists them in being able to respond to people who are in crisis. And offer resources that our cops don't really have access to or knowledge of. And lastly, I would just commend Jefferson County because the whole CIT program in Colorado began here in Jefferson County. That was a collaboration between Golden, Lakewood, Jeffco Sheriff, Wheat Ridge, Lakewood Police Departments. It started, as Mike said, in 2002, and the first class graduated in May or June of 2002. So now we'll go to back to Deputy Chief Harvey to talk about explicit and implicit bias training.
And Deputy Chief, before we do that, just to take a quick check-in with our listening audience, whether they have questions on crisis intervention training or our co-responder program. Any clarifying questions that come to mind?
Well, there is a question from.
I do see Sandra here has a question, and then looks like there's one submitted through the chat as well. Why don't we start with Sandra? You have the floor. What's your question? Looks like you're still on mute, Sandra.
So sorry, it's been a long day. My question was very similar to Michelle's question around grant funding, as opposed to having this being considered within the city budget. So my clarifying question was, the chief had indicated that there was research in 2021 to see about bringing somebody on full time. At that point, would the funding still be primarily grant driven, or would it be something that's incorporated within the operational budget?
Well, Sandra, this currently the only way many of the police departments or several of the police departments in the area was able to fund this was through grant programs and in collaboration with Jefferson Center. Right now, and going into the 21 or 22 budget, we do 2-year budgeting here. We do not have funding specifically allocated through the general fund to pay for such a position. My goal in doing some research and presenting an argument that would go forward through our budgetary process would be to look at permanently funding a position. But right now, the collaboration is done through the agencies and Jefferson Center.
And just to clarify, Chief, we should be hearing in the near future about whether or not we're going to continue with that grant going into 2021. I think it's looking good, but even if for some reason that grant does not come to fruition, we are going to do everything we can in partnership with JCMH, or it's just Jefferson Center now, to keep this program going because we have had such good success with it, and it's important with the mental health issues that we're seeing in the city today. So we're excited about it, keeping it going, and we brought a second, like I said, a second co-responder on. just recently, as a matter of fact, a couple months ago. So we are going to do everything we can in our power to keep it going via grant funding. But if not, we will try to find other avenues.
Sandra, thanks for your question. Appreciate you asking that. It looks like Michelle had the same question through the chat, so hopefully that satisfied both of you. And any other clarifications on those two topics, co-responder and crisis intervention? Okay, if not, we'll kick it back to Deputy Chief, I think is next to address explicit and implicit bias.
Thank you, Chief. And Michelle, I just wanted to let you know I will be answering a question, but you were already in my head. The question you posed in the chat was actually being saved for this particular segment. What I can tell everybody is it's interesting. I had a diversity committee meeting today with my facilitators, and this was one of the exact topics that I talked to my folks about, and that is that many people of color are afraid to be arrested by the police, and sometimes that's why they end up resisting. Well, it's just not people of color. It's homeless people. It's people that are in mental crisis. And so getting officers to understand that is a task. So I'm going to be vulnerable with you all, and I hope you'll walk with me just a little bit, because this is a theme that I am very, very passionate about, and I have to guard my passion a bit. If the chief likes to tell me I hear you, because I can get really worked up over this one, because I believe in it wholeheartedly. I can tell you my wife is a person of color. My children are biracial. I believe that every human being is entitled to live their absolute best life possible. So as I guard my comments as we're moving through this, I just need you to understand that this topic is very, very near and dear to my heart. And it is something we have not done very good with. Again, I can tell you I've been in law enforcement for 33 years. 30 of those as a police officer, 3.5 of those as a dispatcher. And I don't think I have ever gone through a year in my career where a law enforcement agency has done a fantastic job of teaching diversity and bias. I can tell you my first real instruction is when I was working on my master's degree. I got to take an entire class on diversity. But most of mine was by talking with other people. I've been homeless twice in my life, so I know what it's like to eat out of a trash can. I know what it's like to have no roof over your head. So I too feel like I have a kinship with people who are homeless. I've had to work very hard to get to where I'm at, and I've endured every level of abuse you can imagine. So I have a connection with people who have struggled and who may fear any level of government authority, whether it's social services, whether it's human services, whether it's law enforcement. And how do we, as I was explaining to my diversity group today, eke out a relationship with our community? But more importantly, how do we eke out the message to our officers how important this is? When law enforcement is a hard nut to crack, and that's just the truth of it. It is a tight-knit community. It is a very tight subculture, and it is difficult to break through on topics like this. We just haven't done a very good job of it. And I have to tell you, when I was working with my instructors today, I had to find words to motivate them and inspire them and influence them to keep up the good fight, because even they struggle. One-on-one meetings. And we have a diverse organization, folks. We have a diverse organization, and we still struggle with it. But we're not different than society. Society still struggles with these. And sometimes it's just about taking a step back and trying to understand and recognize what it's like to walk in another person's shoes. Sit back for a second and use the two things that God gave you versus the one he gave you, and then feel with your heart, not with your head. That's hard to do. It's hard to do because every single person that works in our department is no different than every person that is on this call that lives in our community. They were raised how they were raised. They are a subject of their upbringing and then their own mental model. Whatever they choose to have believed in, whatever caused that ship to turn for them, that's the road they're on. So as one of the leaders in our organization, I'm tasked with saying, how do we do better with this? And I'll tell you, I've tried. I brought in an outside instructor twice. It didn't go over well. The training was an absolute flop. Not because of the message that was being sent, but trying to understand how you can get a facilitator to break through a subculture that on this topic can be difficult to teach. Because you're not talking about a tool that we want to give somebody. I can give them a use of force policy and talk to them about the use of force policy. How do I train a mind and a heart? How do I get somebody to look through a different paradigm, to go to a different level in the building and look out a different window to see what that view might look like? That is a challenge, and we are struggling with it. Law enforcement struggles with it, but our society is struggling with it. So what I can tell you is we're working on it. And we're far from being good. What I can tell you is after the last training that I brought in an outside instructor and it didn't go well, the chief and I sat down and we had a long talk. And I said, we've got to do this from the inside out. We've got to start it from the inside out. And so we decided that we were going to recruit people within the organization to take on this task. And I can tell you the first person I approached is a civilian employee who happens to be African American. And I asked her if she would go on this journey with me. The first person I asked, and she was like, whoa, I don't know. But she took up the task. And then I got a Hispanic female employee. And then I got one of our gay officers to agree to help out. And then I got a couple other people. And now I'm going back to recruit 2 more people within the organization. Because I think the best way for us to turn the corner on this, before we can get into the grassroots of teaching what implicit or explicit bias is, or individual bias versus industrial bias, we have to get people to want to sit down and listen and engage in a conversation and be vulnerable. And so we did that. We started sending them to training. And this last year, we had our first training with our own instructors in front of the room. I have to tell you, I was shocked. We had a picture, one of the pictures, they were talking about bias. And in this particular case, we're talking about individual bias. They had a picture of Caitlyn Jenner and Bruce Jenner. You couldn't imagine the conversation that was arrived from looking at a picture. We had a picture of David Craig, and I think it was Bloom, playing in a role where they were homeless. And then the next picture was them in their tuxedos getting their awards. And we asked people, what do you see? This is where we have to start. It's the ground level, right? We got to walk out the door, and we got to reach out, and we got to extend a hand. This is about building a bridge. And this is about us walking to the middle, extending a hand, and inviting our community to meet us in the middle. We have to build a partnership, and it's going to be hard, long work. But I can tell you, we are up to the task. But we're not there. So today, when I was talking to my diversity committee, I implored them to keep up the good fight. I found out that the African American female who's on the team had the opportunity to meet with 2 of our most staunch, opinionated officers one-on-one. She found the courage to engage in a one-on-one meeting. See, it doesn't have to happen. This is what I keep telling you. These conversations have to become real. They got to become part, the fabric of the organization. It's not a picture and it's not a slogan. It's not something you can put up on a wall. It's something you got to believe in. It's something you got to want. And it takes leadership to drive that train. So we've turned the rudder. It's going to take time to get the ship turned around. And what I can tell you is we will make progress. What I can also promise you is we will not be perfect, and it is going to take time. And I'm going to be asking this community engagement group to work with us, to help us see things that we can't see, to open our eyes up to things that we can't see. Because when I was talking to my folks today, I was telling them that we have to get our officers to understand that if you're a person of color in this country today, and you didn't grow up in Golden, you don't know who the Golden officer is in front of you, but your only experience has been ugly with law enforcement. The officers got to try to put themselves in that person's shoes at that moment, because that person feels fear, anger, frustration, regret. That's not easy to do, folks. It is a challenge. So that's where we're at. We're at the beginning. And I hope the future is going to be bright for us. I hope that we can do it right. I just went through 6 hours of training through Government Alliance and Race Equity. It was all on bias. I could sit here and talk to you about bias. My family has lived bias. I've had to try to talk. It took me a year. I was telling the chief this today. It took me a year to try to get my children. I have 6-year-old twins. They'll be 7 in January. To be proud of the fact that their skin is brown. To acknowledge that their skin is brown. To know that that's okay, that their skin is brown. So this is something we all walk through. And I don't have the answers for you yet. All I can tell you is we're on a journey. It's not a destination, and it's going to be a long road. We are searching for the best schools we can. We are trying to find every opportunity to engage the members of our organization one-on-one and as a whole. And we are trying to find ways that we can bring the story to them. One of the things that we talked about today was we have an hour at our in-service. We want to try to find somebody from the outside, a person of color, to maybe spend 20, 30 minutes on 4 different days of the week in February to tell a story about why maybe they're afraid of law enforcement. And so we're going to search for maybe a person that's willing to do that for us. And we hope that maybe we'll start to open up some eyes, which will open up curiosity, which will open up conversation. And maybe, just maybe, it will create change. So sorry for getting on a rampage there. This is something that's important to me. I hope you'll take my passion as being honest, but we're trying to get there.
All right. One of the issues that came up pretty often in these group discussions, or excuse me, in both the listening session and then online and from Facebook, revolved around people's desire for us to consider something like Denver's STAR initiative. And what I want you to know is that, first off, it stands for Support Team Assisted Response. And to clarify a few points, we do believe that there are things that police departments, including ours, could be considering to have others respond to. And that's the basis of the STAR program that's in Denver, but also there are numerous cities across the country that are developing similar type programs, and they generally focus, as does the STAR program, on lower level crimes, or not even perhaps crimes, but people that are in crisis and or people that are sometimes just in need of services. And so in Denver's case, just so you're familiar, this is a pilot project that Denver has started that they only ramped up and became active the first week of June. They'd been working on this for quite some time. And I think it was just coincidental that it started literally in conjunction with the protests that we've seen all around the country. Their program teams a social worker, a therapist, with a paramedic, emergency services worker, and they respond to the type of calls that I discussed that are, generally speaking, they are not a public safety risk. So it is things like substance abuse, mental health issues, people needing services. And currently, it's a Monday through Friday program. You should also know that in Denver, they have a pretty robust co-responder program, and they see actually this STAR project as I guess what you would call a supplement. And they actually see, Deputy Chief Harvey mentioned prongs earlier, 3 prongs. One is their STAR program. A supplement to that is the co-responder program. And then, of course, as the final, as needed, a patrol response. So the bottom line is, do we believe there are calls that we could handle, that others could handle, that are in a position to handle such things as opposed to police? Yes, we do. The issue here in our city and in our county is the resources to come up with to fund such a program, and how would that occur? And we can have discussions about that in the future, but there's no question in our mind that there are certainly calls for service that are certainly better handled by others. And we are seeing that in as simple a thing as our co-responder program and the results and the positive results that is having. The issue that has also come up pretty regularly from various sources, although this one didn't so much come up in our listening session, was reference 8 can't wait and the policies around 8 can't wait. This is one of those topics that I can tell you is an area that we do cover a lot of those currently by policy or practice. And I will briefly go over what those 8 categories are, and will tell you what it is what my response to those are. There are on the 8 Can't Wait website, they will tell you that they generally believe that when they surveyed a bunch of law enforcement agencies back over in 2015 and 2016, this concept's been around for a while, and they sent this survey to 100 of the largest police departments in the country. The research would seem to indicate that if you implement some or all of these, that you can have a significant impact on the reduction of use of force and deadly force. So the first one is banning chokeholds and strangleholds. And I can let you know that our police department years ago had eliminated the use of chokeholds and neck restraints unless the officer was justified in the use of deadly force. And that's been in place in our policy for many years. And we have recently updated that policy or at least that practice as it relates to the aforementioned rewrite of our use of force policy, where we are limiting the use of chokeholds based on the requirements of Senate Bill 2217. require de-escalation. And I will tell you that often we have issues in policing about anything that says require, because that would seem to intimate that we should do it in all circumstances. And the job that we're engaged in, that might be in this respect similar to the many of the jobs that you all that are listening tonight are involved in. It is rare that you can ever say you have to do something this way all the time, because there are circumstances that will modify that. We don't have specific policies that directly say that you are required to use de-escalation techniques, which are often considered things like distancing, communication skills, tactics, but we do direct officers to use the least amount of force necessary in whatever the situation is that they are engaged with. And we certainly have trained that way for years and years. And some of that was discussed earlier in our the use of force discussion, as mentioned by Deputy Chief Harvey. There is a discussion about a requirement of warning before shooting. Well, I can tell you, number one, we do ban warning shots in our policies because on the one hand, they can be very dangerous when you fire around. Historically, you might have seen it like on TV where they'll fire a shot into the air. We don't know where that is going to come, where that shell is going to come down and who might get injured by it. Our updated use of force policy does allow for the use of that and what would be considered an appropriate circumstance. But our policies in generally require that officers, let me rephrase that. We train and direct officers to give verbal warnings whenever it is feasible. And I can tell you over the years of reviewing the use of force reports that were mentioned earlier by the deputy chief, that we do that, but there are those circumstances that can happen in literally the blink of an eye, where an officer will not have, and nor will it be reasonable for an officer to attempt to give a warning before she or he were to use deadly force in particular. There's the desire to exhaust all other means before shooting. Our current use of force policy does state that deadly physical force shall only be used when a member reasonably believes that a lesser degree of force is inadequate. And again, as I mentioned to City Council back in July, in the 30 plus years I've been with the police department, accepting SWAT related call outs, most of which have those shootings have occurred in jurisdictions outside our city. We've had one police officer involved shooting, and I have read hundreds of use of force reports over the years and have seen numerous cases that involve weapons, knives, etc. And our officers have been so far extremely successful in utilizing their skills to end that situation without the use of deadly force, but not always, as you might expect, without the use of some degree of force. Duty to intervene, we had never had in our policy any duty to intervene. We have had for a number of years a policy that required officers to report when they viewed what they thought to be excessive force by members. But we now do have in our, we put out what we call a special order shortly after Senate Bill 217 was announced, and we knew that provision was going to be coming. that specifically requires officers to intervene if they observe what they believe, based on the knowledge and experience of what they're seeing going on, that there was an officer is engaging in the use of excessive force. Another one of the provisions is to ban shooting at moving vehicles. Again, we have had that in place for a long time. When we did have it, as we have it in our policy, it specifically addressed that you can't do that unless, again, you were justified in the use of deadly force. And it's a very difficult circumstance. But the fact that a car might be coming at you doesn't justify the use of that when you can avoid contact with that vehicle. I will tell you the one caveat that exists around that specifically has to do with, as you've probably seen, particularly in some of the European countries, is if you had let's say a van or a moving truck loaded with what we had reason to believe had explosives on it, and it was attempting to, say, come into the crowd at the Buffalo Bill Days or at a candlelight walk, where we would and are authorized to use deadly force to stop that. It would also apply if somebody were approaching a crowd and shooting at the crowd, but it is incredibly rarely used. Probably the most, I would say, controversial for some folks would be the use of force continuum. We could spend a long time talking about that. I won't do that tonight, other than to tell you that we abandoned the use of force continuum probably 7, 8, 9 years ago, because the use of force continuum was really training tools in terms of how to what tools could or should be used in any given circumstance, and was developed, honestly, the first use of force continuums were developed in 1970. And although there is debate out there in the professional field, both for and against, what we believe is the better practice is relying on constitutional cases, which talk very clearly to officers about what level of force they can use given the circumstances at the time. And that is a prospective look back based on would a reasonable officer in a similar situation have used the level of force that that officer used. And it does not include facts that were not known to the officer at the time. Now, Senate Bill 217, that case law, which is Graham versus Connor and Tennessee versus Graham versus Garner and Tennessee. Wait a minute, I'm getting that wrong. In any event, there's two cases, constitutional case law, that address those. One is the use of deadly force on a fleeing felon or a low-level criminal, which was Tennessee versus Garner. And that case was decided in the 80s, as was Graham versus Connor, which is the case that talks about what is the reasonable use of force given the circumstances at the time. So we're open for conversation in the future, but we believe that use of force continuum, which if you go out there and look, you can find 30, 40, or 50, or even 60 different graphs, from stair stepping to circles to diamonds, as to trying to tell an officer what they should use. And generally speaking, it starts with the idea of officer's presence, verbal communication, hand control, soft or hard. Soft meaning, as Deputy Chief Harvey talked about, you're moving somebody around, to hard, where you are perhaps placing someone on the ground, to then use of force and deadly force. So that's an area where we feel pretty confident that we're using constitutional provisions, which under new Senate Bill 217, we will see where that goes, because they use a standard called objectively reasonable. And we know that there's a United States constitutional basis for that, but the state of Colorado Supreme Court could look at that differently in the future. And I think that's all I need to address right now on that topic.
Thanks, Chief. Any questions for Chief Kilpatrick on 8 Can't Wait or the Denver's STAR Initiative program? Any clarifying questions? I'm not seeing any. I know there's 2 topics you still want to address yet. One is school resource officer, and then data and statistics. But are we doing okay? We're at an hour and a half. I know we didn't quite know how long this would go, and I still want to make sure we get to everybody who wants to comment at the end. So unless I see any objections, we'll get to the last 2, and then I'll seek any other comments you might have. So I think we're on school resource officers, and I believe that's Deputy Chief. Is that right?
Yeah, I promise I'll be quick on this one. So the police department does not have, we have not thought about taking our officers out of the schools. That's not something we're openly discussing right now. We believe there's value in having police officers in the schools. We do have 2 school resource officers. Their primary responsibilities are Golden High School and then Bell Middle School. And then they each have a elementary school. And then our police officers in patrol handle Connections Learning Center and then Golden View Classic Academy. What I can tell you is that the school resource officer program and the way it works here in the city of Golden is their primary role is not as a law enforcement officer. So if you will, imagine a triangle in front of you. In the center of the triangle, the word mentor is in there. That's the primary role of a school resource officer. Number 1 is in a mentor. If you look at one side, it's going to say teacher. If you look at the other side, it's going to say counselor. And then if you look at the bottom, it'll say the role of a law enforcement officer. 3 of those roles have to do with reaching out and connecting with kids. We only have them respond to crimes that they absolutely have to. As a matter of fact, you can actually talk to our officers. They know our philosophy within this department is not to charge kids with crimes unless we have no other alternative. We seek other solutions, diversion programs, etc. We're actually looking at potentially implementing a restorative justice program in our schools. And we've conducted some research. It's costly, but we've conducted some research and we're looking at that. The chief and I are both passionate about not charging kids with crime and creating criminals out of them. We are instead looking for ways to build relationships with kids. So we're not interested in removing them, but if our community comes back to us and they have a large push that they don't believe we should have kids in schools, then I think we're open to having that broader conversation. But for now, we want to keep those in school because we think we're doing it right. We think the role is to mentor kids, to counsel kids, and to be a teacher. And every once in a while, they have to handle a law enforcement case. And sometimes we know that some kids break the law. Some kids are going to break windows. It's going to happen. So that's kind of our philosophy. I can answer any questions on it. I didn't think I needed to spend a ton of time on this one.
And our last theme that we're prepared to talk about tonight, and specifically, is data and statistics. And we get lots of questions about that. And I guess first and foremost, I want to say we want to be as open and transparent as possible as to everything that's going on within the police department. You know, we do, as part of our CALEA certification, Commission on accreditation, law enforcement accreditation, which is a national standards and guidelines. There's lots of reports that we are required to generate. We generate those reports. They can be anywhere from our use of force to demographic information, to internal affairs complaints and commendations. And we do an annual report. We're putting all of those online. We have recently put online basically our entire policy and procedure manual, absent a few things that we think might be specifically law enforcement sensitive, excuse me. But we also know we've got more work to do in this area. We have, people who are interested down to the most minute detail what we do. Other people who an annual report once a year is sufficient. So we're still trying to work on what do we put out? How often do we put it out? In what format do we put it out? And in what location do we put it? We'd like to have it in one place where all information that we are putting out in the police department can be found in one location rather than perhaps having to go to the police department webpage or the police department Facebook page or the city's webpage. And so this is a priority for us in 21 to look at how can we do this better. Our records management system is relatively new. We were the first entity. It's a collaborative effort between 6 policing agencies in the county, and we were the first to go live back in. I want to say it's been about 18 months ago. So we still are working through all those details, but we will continue to work at putting out information in a timely fashion that gives everybody access to the information they need and or contacts so that if there's something you're not getting, we can get that information out there to you. So that's all I'll say about that now. We're happy to, that kind of concludes our portion of what we wanted to specifically talk about tonight. And I'll let Jason take it from here in terms of questions of where we go next.
Chief, thank you very much. I appreciate all the information. I know it was a lot of information, but again, I think our goal tonight was to share that with you all so you have an opportunity to see what we're thinking about and what we're doing and the kinds of practices and policies we have in place. Our communications team tells me we have a 2-hour block for this programming scheduled, which takes us to 8 o'clock. So I'm going to leave the last half hour for anybody who wants to provide a comment or share additional thought or even ask another question. Happy to take that as well. Right now, I'm only seeing 2 people on the screen and a lot of names. So if you do have something, please just bring your camera on, signal me, or put it in the chat, and we'll make sure we get to you before we close out the night. So anybody have anything they want to share with the police department and about anything you've heard tonight or something that you've been thinking about since our last meeting? I see Tyler, and then I'm going to go to Sandra. I also see Sandra. So Tyler, I'll start with you. The floor is yours, sir.
All right. Yeah, wow. I wasn't sure what this listening session was going to be like or what it was going to entail. And I'm thoroughly pleased with how you approach this session. Chief Kilpatrick, Commander Hendershot, and Joe Harvey, Deputy Chief Joe Harvey, all provided great insight into many things that are in your department. And Jason, thanks for taking the time and hosting this. I think these conversations are very valuable. And I also know that you're going above and beyond. You're not required to do this. So you know I recognize this. So thanks. Deputy Chief Harvey, I want to personally thank you for sharing your personal life with us and being so honest. It means a lot. I hear you when you talk about your kids not liking the way they look. These conversations are tough, but you're doing the right thing and giving them the tools to combat the biases they will face in their life. We can't just flip a light switch to a better world, but you're heading in the direction. Understanding you can do better is the first step, and you have that down to a T. So I truly thank you. I didn't have much to say throughout as you were providing such valuable reporting. I'm taking a lot of notes, so might have a couple of emails going out later on trying to get some clarifications. But I just wanted to also say that, once again, I'm an open book. So if you all have any questions, concerns, feel free to reach out. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Tyler. Appreciate your comments. I'm going to go to Sandra because I did see your hand earlier as well.
I'm going to echo what Ty was just saying. I am incredibly grateful to all four of you who have shown up, and I see Carly's name's here too. So I'm not as familiar with some of the other names on here. They may very well be part of staff that I'm not aware of, but Chief Bill, Deputy Harvey, Commander Hendershot, City Manager Jason Spolinsky, you guys are incredible. I did not come here with any expectations. The conversation that we had in October was really valuable, and I want to reiterate that obviously I think you're getting more familiar with myself and with Ty and maybe Michelle, some of the same voices and faces that are speaking up. But it's not just us. We are making the commitment to take this information back to the GAC community, hopefully to stem the tide for questions from the community so we can answer them within our own community and not continually send waves and waves of people to say, well, what are you doing? And one idea that we've continuously emphasized is that you all are listening. And we know that you're listening because what a remarkable turnaround within 1 month to have such a valuable 90-minute information sharing, not just about the things that are already in place and perhaps in some cases have been in place for years, but also to get some of the personal perspective, the vulnerability that you guys as humans have shared with us, and the future next steps. I'm very, very excited about the fact that you guys have emphasized that this is a start. I'm very, very excited to continue in this partnership. And I mostly just want to express my appreciation and gratitude for the time spent, the emotional heart space spent, the energy, because we know it's been a hard year. So 2021 is going to be probably a hard year. So it's really, really important that we acknowledge, and we do this a lot within GAC, but acknowledge every single win, even if it feels small. Every single positive step forward is a positive step forward and something we're celebrating. And I'm really, really grateful for the conversation, the time, the information sharing, and really grateful for the opportunity to view this as a ramp forward and not just a one and done, pony show for where you guys are at. I'm confident that if I were to disappear and fade into the woodwork and y'all never saw me again, the good work would still continue. But I'm very much looking forward to being part of the partnership for the community we would like to see. And I just, again, want to express my appreciation and gratitude. You've all been wonderful.
Sandra, thank you very much. Appreciate those kind words. I see Saoirse.
Hi there.
Hi.
So I wanted to make sure that anybody that had questions went first, and that's still true. But I do have a comment. You've heard your praises sung, and I could go on, and it would be sincere. I am happy to have been a part of this because I consider it a personal responsibility of mine to share what I've heard with others. If there are ever any questions about what's happening in the police department, I feel it's you might call it my moral obligation to let them know what you're doing. If they haven't had the opportunity to tune in, plug in, I will correct that error. I can assure you. Secondly, I wanted to specifically mention something. Last time, I'd mentioned a book that I'd read that had a real impact on me, My Grandmother's Hands. It may not have that strong an impact on other people, but one of the things that I read in that book was how police officers, some of the tragedies that have hit the news, when they've dived into it, there are a lot of things that go on, of course, in those circumstances, but one of the things I read, and it wasn't just a one-off, it was sort of a repeated theme, is that a police officer may be in a situation and because of implicit or unconscious bias, experience fear in that police officer's body. And out of that fear, they react from the training and the gun is in their hand and it goes off and they don't even know why. And so what I heard tonight is that you are offering experiential training to your officers to counter whatever that might be in under those circumstances, so that the impulse to de-escalate is as strong in the situations that might be a little complicated as that impulse of fear. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm not saying it very well, but I see you nodding, Deputy Chief Harvey. So it's like it has to be in your body that this is what you do under stress. And that's what I heard tonight. And I appreciate that.
Thank you, Saoirse. Appreciate those thoughts. Anybody else on the call here who would like to make a comment? We did have one in the chat from Alice Madison thanking us for doing this. It's our pleasure, of course, and as we've said throughout the night, we'll continue to have additional conversation as we move forward. But I don't want to end before we make sure we give everybody an opportunity who does want to say something. Anybody else? Joe, would you like to make a comment?
Yeah, I would like to give my email address out. So if anybody wants to write it down, it's pretty easy. It's the letter J and my last name, Harvey, at cityofgolden.net. I check my emails all times of the day and night. Email me, and my phone number is 303-818-8323. That's my personal cell phone number. If there's anything you want to talk about or things that we can do better, don't hesitate to contact me.
Thank you, Joe. My gratitude to all of you for joining us tonight. These are important conversations, and you spent an hour and 45 minutes with us, and that's asking a lot from us to have your attention that long with all the other things going on in your lives and your family. So we do appreciate you spending time with us. My thanks to Chief Kilpatrick and Deputy Chief Harvey and Amanda Hendershot as well for taking the time. One of the things I've always appreciated about Chief Kilpatrick is he shares a very similar philosophy as I do on hiring. I've attended a number of swearing-in ceremonies the Golden Police Department has hosted for our new officers. And one of the things that Chief Kilpatrick always talks about at those ceremonies is how important that we have people that have the right heart, who take that oath and pin that badge on, but they approach their job with the right heart and mindset. And I'm a believer in that as well for all of our city employees, that it's not just about hiring the person who's got the most degrees and the most experience and all that, but you have to hire for the right characteristics of someone who approaches their job with such care and heart in them. And the rest you can train them to do the right way, but it starts with that foundation. And I know that's very important to Chief Kilpatrick, and it is to me as well for our organization. So thank you, everyone. If there's no other last comments, we do appreciate you joining us. Please, again, put on your calendar early January. I think it's January 7th. Carly will correct me if I'm wrong, because I know she's listening. But January 7th is our next check-in with you all, and we'll have another community conversation and continue this great conversation. So I hope you all can join us then. And until then, I wish you all a happy holiday season, and please continue to stay safe in light of COVID. Wear your masks and do all the things. I know we're almost through this. We'll get to the other end of this thing as soon as we can. But thank you all for joining us tonight. and have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.